Introduction of Maccabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Shantae Elliott. Maccabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Maccabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions, with full directions to learners how to acquire a pleasing vocalization, showing how to begin and practice marvelous illustrations of ventriloquism, with amusing dialogues for beginners, including the repertoire of the English railway porter, as performed by Frederic MACCABE in his celebrated mimical, musical, and ventriloquial entertainment, Begone Dull Care. Where should this be? In the air or the earth? This is no mortal business, nor no sound that the earth owes. I hear it now above me. What is it? A spirit. Lord, how it looks about! Believe me, sir, it carries a brave form, but 'tis a spirit. No, it eats and sleeps, and hath such senses as we have. Such. The Tempest. Introduction. The art of ventriloquism is an accomplishment so rare, so little practiced, and so little understood that its possessor is considered a rara avis. Like the arts of music and mimicry, it affords, especially to the uninitiated, an intellectual diversion, and is productive of a vast fund of pleasing and wonderful entertainment. And yet, unlike those, it has but few representatives of celebrity. One reason is, probably, the want of information concerning it, for it is remarkable what an amount of misconception prevails respecting the nature of its operations. The object of these pages is to convey, from personal experience, some knowledge of the mysteries in which it is enshrouded. Popular notions are current and accepted that the ventriloquist can throw his voice anywhere within the range of hearing, and make it explode at pleasure at any given pace, like a bullet from an air gun. A perusal of these pages will help to dispel this common delusion and show what charms, what conjurations, and what mighty magic there are in it. It is, of course, beyond human possibility to make these dead pages speak outright. The most elaborate and well-defined description utterly fails to give the resonance of the full-toned vocal organs, swelling with volumes of sound, or the modulations of their tone as they are subsiding, their vibrations on the senses. As well might one try to taste mustard by merely whispering the word. Where the things themselves are wanting, it is useless to listen or to attempt to taste. So, likewise, it is impossible to convey in words the indescribable art of the mimic, by which, with one touch of nature, in a tone, a glance, or a grimace, in a turn, a twist, or a shrug, he may set the table in a roar. It is not to be supposed, therefore, that these pages can give voice and mimetic power where these are wanting, or that they will make a ventriloquist of any casual reader, any more than giving him a pipe to play upon is sufficient to enable him to discourse most eloquent music, for it cannot command any utterance of harmony. But so far as explaining the mode whereby such skill may be acquired, the following instructions will serve to encourage and draw out the latent talent of anyone whose disposition is toward acquiring and perfecting himself as a good speaker and ventriloquist. During the season of 1871 to 1872, while I was lessee of the Charing Cross Theatre, London, the subject of ventriloquism was a topic of considerable discussion and interest among many circles and societies in the metropolis of Great Britain. This was evinced by numerous communications and inquiries addressed to scientific and quasi-scientific journals. The editors of one of these, Lead and Water, wrote to me asking me to answer the various letters addressed to him on the subject. The following letter of mine was published in his paper on the 20th of December, 1871. To the editor of Land and Water. Sir, the questions of your various correspondents on the subject of ventriloquism do not admit of a simple and direct reply. There is no art so little understood and so much misunderstood as the art called ventriloquism. The popular belief that the ventriloquist throws his voice is an error. That most fictitious of all fictions, Valentine Vox, is founded on and has done much to propagate this error. The very name of the art, ventriloquism or belly speaking, is believed by many to be a misnomer. The learned and careful critic of the Times, in a notice of my performance at the St. James Hall, London, 3 years ago, speaks of it as the art to which ignorance still gives the name ventriloquism, but Sir David Brewster, in his letters on natural magic, ingeniously defends the name. He says that ventriloquism loses its distinctive character if its imitations are not performed by a voice from the belly. The voice, indeed, does not actually come from that region, but when the ventriloquist utters sounds from the larynx without moving the muscles of his face, he gives them strength by a powerful action of the abdominal muscles. Hence, he speaks by means of his belly, although the throat is the real source from which the sounds proceed. This, in my opinion, proves that the term ventriloquism is correct, or as nearly correct as any which exigencies of terminology can supply. Most ventriloquists believe, or pretend to believe, in order to favor the belief in others, that they have a natural gift and a special power of throwing the voice, so as to make it sound in any spot they choose. The smallest knowledge of acoustics, or a little reflection without the smallest knowledge of the principles of acoustics, will show the absurdity of this belief in an impossibility. That Sir David Brewster was not entirely free from this belief may be seen from the following passage in his letters. He says, "The influence over the human mind which is the ventriloquist derives from the skillful practice of his art is greater than that which is exercised by any other species of conjurer. The ordinary magician requires his theatre, his accomplices, and the instruments of his art, and he enjoys but a local sovereignty within the precincts of his own magic circle. The ventriloquist, on the contrary, has the supernatural always at his command, in the open fields as well as in the crowded city, in the private apartment as well as the public hall. He can summon up innumerable spirits, and though the persons of his fictitious dialogue are not visible to the eye, yet they are as unequivocally present to the imagination of his audience as if they had been shadowed forth in the silence of a spectral form. I hope I will not be charged with presumption when I say that Sir David Brewster, in his admiration of, and the pleasure which he has derived from hearing M. Alexander, of whom he speaks in enthusiastic terms, and whom I am bound to believe was the greatest ventriloquist ever known, has allowed his imagination to mislead him into exaggeration. All the illusions of ventriloquism depend very much upon the imagination of the hearer. The power of imitating sounds is only a part of the art. The effect of ventriloquism is a creation of the imagination produced by a deception of the ear and the eye. The attention of the hearers must be caught by little indescribable actions and tricks of manner, and directed to the spot from whence the sound is supposed to proceed. The effect to be produced must be suggested to the mind at the moment that the sound is imitated, and the imagination of the audience thus made to help in the illusion. Though a man may possess all the physical requisites for ventriloquism, viz., a power of imitating sound and abnormal strength in the larynx, the tonsils, and the abdominal muscles, he would be no more a ventriloquist than, with the possession of paint-brushes and palette, he would be a painter. These physical requisites are, I believe, possessed by most people in a greater or less degree, and are capable of development, but the power of catching and directing the attention of suggestion to the mind of the audience by almost imperceptible gesture, of exciting their imagination without appearing to act, these are requisites not easily acquired, and form the great difficulty in the way of laying down rules and exercises for the acquirement of the power of ventriloquism. Fred MACCABE, Charing Cross Theatre. Since writing the above, I have devoted much time and study to the subject. In listening to and noting the various opinions and theories of imperfect amateur observers, for the art of observation requires training, and reading the many scientific treatises on the voice and ventriloquism. The latter, with one exception, I have found to be worthless, either for explaining the nature of or teaching the art of ventriloquism. The exception is a little book entitled Letters on Natural Magic by Sir David Brewster, addressed to Sir Walter Scott, published by Harper Brothers, New York. In this book, there is one letter on ventriloquism which is distinguished by elegance of style and a strange mixture of keen perception, scientific analysis, and enthusiastic simplicity of credulity. All this listening, noting, and reading has modified my opinion expressed in the first phrase of my letter to Land and Water. I said, "There is no art so little understood and so much misunderstood as the art called ventriloquism." I withdraw the phrase "little understood," and adhere more strongly to the phrase "much misunderstood." Sir David Brewster and all other sincere writers on the subject have written from the position of the deceived hearer. I have not found anything written by one of the deceivers worthy of a moment's consideration. They seem to me to be all written with the purpose of keeping up and strengthening the deception. After many years of practice and observation, I am convinced that this art is not the result of any special peculiar formation of the vocal organs. It is not a gift, in the common acceptation of the term. That it requires certain special qualities of voice and ear is beyond a doubt, but these qualities are such as most people possess. The qualities required for a ventriloquist are flexibility, ordinary strength in the cartilaginous membrane of the throat and the muscles of abdominal regions, and a power of imitativeness. It will be readily conceded that these qualities are possessed by the majority of people who have no physical defect in these organs. But the power of imitativeness is dependent on a combination of qualities of the ear and the voice. The correct imitation of sounds depends entirely upon the ear. A person possessed of the most perfect and highly trained vocal organs, if he have a defective ear, can neither sing in tune nor imitate sounds correctly, though he be endowed with every other requisite for mimicry. The province of the ear in relation to the production of sounds is very clearly and ably treated of by Dr. Pardee in a paper called The Physical Requirements of Song, published in the Lotos Leaves, New York, 1875. End of introduction.
Chapter 1 of MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Chapter 1. What is ventriloquism? Where should this be? "I' the air or the earth? This is no mortal business, nor no sound that the earth owes. I hear it now above me. What is it? A spirit? Lord, how it looks about! Believe me, sir, it carries a brave form. But 'tis a spirit. No, it eats and sleeps, and hath such senses as we have, such." The Tempest. The word ventriloquism is derived from the Latin venter, the belly, and loquor, I speak. Hence its significance, belly speaking, speaking in the belly as distinct from speaking in the ordinary way with the mouth. It accordingly conveyed the idea of the ability of expressing language otherwise than by word of mouth, and was esteemed in ancient times as being a special gift, whereby the possessor had a power something more than natural. For it was conceived that he was possessed of a familiar spirit, which had taken up its abode in the person, and manifested itself in such an astonishing and extraordinary way that it was in constant attendance, dispensing with the ordinary physical agencies of speech; sometimes heard inwardly, at others leaving the corporeal frame and making itself heard in space, in trees and forests, in the vaults or domes of temples, above and below and round about; so that the ventriloquial voice partook as much of a supposed spiritual nature as of the physical in its strange and, to the ancients, inexplicable phenomena. Those who could make these strange effects kept a profound secrecy, for little has been handed down to the present day in the way of information. There can be no doubt that in ancient times the ventriloquist played no unimportant part in history, in influencing the minds and policies of rulers, and, consequently, in shaping out the destinies of peoples and the rise and fall of kingdoms. It is philosophically maintained that the Witch of Endor impressed Saul with her ventriloquial powers, for it is not recorded that the latter saw the ghost of Samuel. No doubt, if the veil of darkness could be raised, many historical circumstances have been influenced for better or worse by the association of the ventriloquist's art, in directing or controlling the prime movers and actors therein. It has been left to modern science, however, to discover and account for the physiological operations and powers of the vocal organs. The observations of these, while in operation in the manifestation of sounds or tones, conclusively show that what is called ventriloquism is but a peculiar method of vocalization, which, differing from the ordinary colloquial way of making articulations forward in the mouth, alters the directions of these sounds by so managing the conformation of the mouth and lips as to keep back the vocalized sounds, and cause their utterance to be so muffled and hollow as to appear like distant sounds, more or less remote. This is done by varying and retracting the tongue, enlarging the cavities at the back of the mouth, by dilating the glottis and laryngean tubes, and so increasing their elasticity and services, which thereby operate in restraining the voice inwardly, and in producing vocal effects of a new and unusual nature. These capabilities of contracting and expanding the vocal organs must be acquired by continued application and practice. The elasticity of these organs have to be carefully exercised, so as not to strain them, otherwise the voice might be permanently injured, just as lifting too heavy weights strains the muscular powers and jeopardizes their utility and strength. As the bodily exercise of the arms and legs in gymnastic exercises, such as rowing, running, walking, or boxing, adds to their vigor and elasticity, so the organs of the voice, the lungs, the respiratory tubes, and the membranous vocal cords are rendered by practice more powerful, and better subject than before to personal control. It is the musician's practice in singing which enables him, with accuracy and nicety, to sing any given note, and render it with the proper pitch, time, and force of sound. The musician, however, has only one voice to cultivate, whereas the would-be ventriloquist has to discover what other voices he can superadd to his own, each one of which he has to vocalize according to the pitch and characteristics belonging to it. The ventriloquist speaks in more than one voice, and as from a distance. In order to acquire the art of ventriloquism, with all its attendant illusions, it is needful that the learner shall make himself thoroughly conversant with the means to that end. It is necessary, therefore, in the first place to consider the voice, its powers, operations, and adaptability in vocalization. The effects of sound upon the hearing faculties, and the illusions consequent thereon, before entering upon the devised means of using these agencies for the purpose of producing those illusive effects which come under the name of ventriloquism. Without these preliminary considerations, the learner would be unable to account for the elementary causes which he is anxious to avail himself of, or to understand the principles and practical application of these to attain the object desired, the illusion not of himself but of his hearers. The following extract is taken from Gregory's Dictionary of Arts and Sciences, article on Physiology, referring to the voice, speech, and ventriloquism. The voice. The different modifications of which the voice is susceptible depends not so much upon the largeness or smallness of the glottis as on the tension and relaxation of the ligaments that form the sides of the aperture from the glottis into the mouth, which is indeed the true organ of the function. For when an opening is made in the larynx below it, no sound is produced by the passage of the air. It appears, however, that both sides of this opening and the tense or relaxed condition of the parietes of the larynx contribute to modify the voice, or, as it has been expressed, that the larynx is both a wind and string instrument, voice being always acute in females and in young persons previous to the age of puberty, at which time the diameter of the aperture in males undergoes a remarkable enlargement, and the state of tension in the ligaments of the glottis is always in correspondence with the narrowness of the opening. Voice has a further dependence on the length of the trachea, the respiratory tube. A singer who runs through the whole gamut, by passing from the upper to the lower notes, evidently shortens the neck and trachea, but vice versa lengthens them to produce a contrary effect. The strength of the voice depends, then, upon the volume of air that can be expelled from the lungs, and on the greater or lesser power of vibration of the parietes of the canal, possessed in its passing outwards. Birds, the bodies of which are most aerial, have a voice very strong when compared to their size. Their trachea, provided with a double larynx, is almost entirely cartilaginous, particularly in certain chattering birds, as the jay, and some others, while it is nearly membranous in the hedgehog, the noise of which is almost imperceptible. Speech is the prerogative solely of the human species. It is constituted by modifications which are made to pass through from the motions of the tongue, lips, etc. The ape, in which these parts are formed as in man, would speak like him, if the air in passing out of the larynx did not rush into the hyothyroid sacs, in some animals membranous, but cartilaginous in others, and even osseous in the alouette or purr, whose howl is hideous and frightful. Every time the animal, the ape, wishes to cry, these sacs become distended, then emptied, so that it cannot furnish the different parts of the mouth with sounds to be articulated. Articulated sounds are constituted by vowels, the consonants being for the purpose of connecting vowels together. The utterance of consonants is necessarily more forced and unnatural than that of the vowels, hence the superior harmony of those languages which have the greater number of such letters, as in the ancient language of the Greeks, and hence, on the other hand, the harshness of the German, Dutch, and other languages. Singing is performed by the enlargement and contraction of the glottis, by an elevation and depression of the larynx, by an elongation or shortening of the neck, by an accelerated, prolonged, or retarded inspiration, and by either long or short and abrupt expirations. The agreeableness, then, or adjustment of the voice, the extent and variety of inflections of which it is capable, depend on the correct conformation of its organs, or the flexibility of the glottis, elasticity of its cartilages, and particular disposition of different parts of the mouth, nasal passages, etc. If the two halves of the larynx or nasal fossa are unequally disposed, it is sufficient to occasion a defect or precision and neatness of voice. Stammering and lisping are occasioned by a tongue too large, its frenum being too long, and by deficiency or bad arrangement in the teeth. When the apex of the tongue is prevented from striking properly the roof of the mouth, an inability is produced in pronouncing the letter R. Ventriloquism is an art by which certain persons can so modify the voice as to make it appear to the audience to proceed from any distance. The responses of many of the oracles of the ancients were delivered by persons thus qualified to serve the purposes of illusion. An exquisite delicacy of ear perceives every difference which change of place produces in the same sounds. Possessed of such an ear, and a sufficient command over the organs of speech to produce in all respects similar to another, proceeding from any distant object to the audience, the sound which the ventriloquist utters must appear to proceed from that object. There can be no doubt that, by a peculiar modification of the organs of speech, a sound of any kind can be produced, which in faintness, tone, body, and, in short, every other sensible quality, perfectly resembles a sound delivered from the roof of a house opposite. The ear will naturally, without examination, refer it to that situation and distance, the sound which the person hears being only a sign which he has from his infancy been constantly accustomed by experience to associate with the idea of a person speaking from a housetop. If this theory be true, asks the writer, how comes it that ventriloquism is not more frequently and successfully practised? End of chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of Maccabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Abai in October 2014. Maccabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Chapter 2. The Vocal Organs and their Movements in Uttering Sounds and Vocalization. The human voice has a power, influence, scope, and reach little known. Possessed by all mankind, with very few exceptions, its faculty and physiological structure are misinterpreted. From the time of Galen to that of Dodart and Ferrein in the 18th century, scientists have compared the organ of the voice to a flute, and with that definition science remained perfectly content. The voice is the product of the actions of a complex system of the most delicate tone-generating vocal cords, acted upon by the lungs through its feeding pipes, conveying the breath to the cavities formed in the mouth by the different and varying actions of the glottis, the tongue, and the lips. There have been comparisons made between the mechanism of the voice and the Aeolian harp, or the reed of the hautboy, but the most perfect musical invention ever made falls immeasurably short in capacity when compared with that of the human organism. Every vocal articulation made in tones or noises requires the corresponding adjustment of the respective organs whose function it is to contribute to the enunciation of sound. This wonderful activity is seen in the facial muscles, in the movement of the lower jaw, of the lips, and even in the participating expression of the eyes. Strange as it may seem, every normal human being, that is, every human being born without physical defect, is naturally formed to emit or utter all the sounds made by any other being, no matter what may be the language of his country. It is due to the associations surrounding the individual that he acquires only the habit or use of a limited number of articulations or expressions, and knows nothing of any other. It is only recently that science, by the means of a newly discovered instrument called the laryngoscope, which acts as a mirror in showing the action and vibrating changes of the vocal organs, has been enabled to define the natural laws on which all sounds of the human voice depend, and these are found to be the same in both sexes in all mankind. It has been ascertained that speech is the result of the combined workings of two very different sections of our vocal organs. The effect can be observed in the difference between noise and tone. In whisperings there is only a muffled vibration of the air in the cavity of the mouth, occasioned by the action of the tongue and lips, but when the cords in the larynx are excited by the breath, then come tone and voice. The speaking is thus changed from a whisper to loud talking. And as with whispering, so with whistling, the vocal cords have no play. In the vital function of the lungs there are two modes of respiration, in one of which, by a continued emission of breath, is noted a slight noise, as in ordinary breathing or sighing, but when the vocal cords impede the passage there is a jarring noise, as in snoring or groaning. The other mode is when the breath is ejected by repeated jets, as in laughter, crying, and sobbing, and in speaking or singing, in all of which there is more or less vocalization. When it is considered that the action of the respiratory and vocal organs are for the most part involuntary, it is not surprising that their neglect entails a multitude of evils, which the many are either unconscious of or do not notice. Continued speech or continued reading is to many a most fatiguing ordeal. That which ought to be a pleasure is an insufferable strain, through the want of a knowledge of the nature of the voice, and of the natural law which governs the act of inspiration. With easy and regular inspiration or breathing, a moderate expenditure of breath is sufficient for the various vocal and syllabic sounds, as in conversation or even in singing. The voice should never be strained, and whenever there is discomfort in vocalization, the effort should be stayed for a while, for it is only by practice that sounds of a high grade can be perfectly made. This is of essential importance to all who desire to conserve the voice, whether for the purpose of speaking, singing, or ventriloquizing. To disregard this consideration is to render a certain failure in all attempts at perfection in these arts, for it is to be borne in mind that all these are various modes of vocalization. Regarding the conservation of the voice, it is obvious that everything depends upon a healthy and normal state of the vocal organs, both as regards the vital functions of respiration and inspiration, and as regards the membranous fibers and cartilages of the throat also. Swollen tonsils, arising from cold, will entirely prejudice and hinder the proper action of the lungs and the sensitive vocal instruments, and thereby affect the general health. We have all read that man had breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The lips and mouth are not the true organs of inspiration or breathing. It is a prostitution of their functions to delegate to them the duties of another, that organ which nature has wisely appointed. The neglect of this obvious fact lays exposed by the delicately formed mouth, the exquisitely sensitive membranes and filaments of the throat, and the still more delicate lungs, to the keen, penetrating atmosphere, thick and miasmatic, if hot, and equally dangerous if freezingly cold. Children ought to be taught these physiological truths in their early days. The firmly compressed lips, there is no doubt, influence the character, and have much to do with that self-possession and stamp of decision which are in fact the characteristics of an expressive countenance. The more these facts are generally known, the fewer will be the wheezy, husky voices everywhere heard. A pamphlet by Catlin, entitled "Shut Your Mouth," treats this subject in an exhaustive and convincing manner, and should be read by everyone who desires to preserve in a healthy state the vocal and respiratory organs. All the varieties of which the human voice is capable in the vocalization of sounds come under the following general category. 1. Quality, such as rough, smooth, harsh, guttural, deep, full, shrill, thin, or musical. 2. Force, strong, weak, feeble, loud, or faint. 3. Time, long, short, quick, rapid, or slow. 4. Abruptness, sudden and full discharge of sound, explosive. 5. Pitch, high or low, rise or fall. According to Dr. James Rush of Philadelphia, the purest and most plastic sounds in the English language are heard in the usual sounds of the initial letters in the following words, 12 in number: all, art, an, ale, our, isle, old, eel, ooze, and, in, and are produced by the joint functions of the larynx and the adaptable conformation of the mouth and lips. In ventriloquism, however, all the outward manifestations have to be carefully avoided. All these elementary sounds can be uttered with more force and emphasis than any other. He calls these various sounds of the vowels tonic sounds. The next category consists of a number of sounds having properties similar to those of the vowels or tonics, but different in degree. Such are the consonants in the following words, 14 in number: bow, dare, give, vile, zone, ye, woe, then, azure, sing, love, may, not, row. From their inferiority to the tonics he calls them subtonics. These have all a vocality, but in some there is combined an aspiration. Their vocality is modified by the action of the lips, teeth, tongue, and nose. The remaining sounds, 9 in number, are aspirations which have no vocality. They are found produced by a current of the whispering breath, as heard in the following words: up, out, arc, if, yes, he, wheat, thin, push. These he calls atonics. These make up the number of elemental sounds to 35. The utterances of m, n, and ng are purely nasal. If their vocality were dropped, any attempt to utter them would be mere snuffling. The liquid expression of l is often marred by a deformity of utterance, generally caused by a fullness of the tongue or of too much moisture thereon. The subtonic r is often blurred by an imperfect rattling of the tip of the tongue against the upper teeth. The guttural r is occasioned by the vibration of the uvula at the back of the mouth. No pure tones can be given without a careful and full resonance of these so-called tonics and subtonics. It is upon the basis of these elementary sounds that the art of phonography, or shorthand writing, is instituted, by giving a sign to each of these sounds. The natural voice is that used in ordinary speaking, and has a range from the lowest sound to that point where it is said to break. At this point the natural voice gives place to the falsetto, a peculiar sharp shrillness of tone in which may be included a cry, a scream, or a yell. The falsetto is incapable of uttering the atonics. The highest character of the speaking voice is, however, the orotund, so called by Dr. Rush, to designate that full resounding musical tone in expressing any of the elementary sounds, and which he considers the only proper voice to use, the one that is cultivated and not vitiated by the growth of natural defects, as is the case with nearly all neglected or uncultivated natural voices. The orotund voice can only be acquired by careful practice in correctly intonating all the tonic and subtonic sounds, which gains for the voice an elasticity, strength, depth, and clearness of resonance, agreeably surprising to any one who may not have given any previous attention thereto. The result is a ringing and musical quality quite delightful to hear and listen to, but rarely heard except from an occasional orator or actor on the stage. By degrees there is acquired in this practice a beautifully distinct pronunciation, a depth of power and intonation which, it must be noted, are highly essential in vocalizing ventriloquially. This full, deep-chested voice is not fatiguing, for it requires no undue exertion. The lower tones or sounds do not require so many vibrations of the vocal cords as the upper notes, and hence do not waste or exhaust the breathing powers. For if the lungs be naturally filled with air, every note or sound, especially on the lower scale, can be made with ease and regularity, with its due proportion of breath necessary for so doing. But any attempt to raise the voice beyond its just natural pitch, and persist in its maintenance, will be as needlessly fatiguing and will create as speedy an exhaustion as when, instead of walking, one were to run always at full speed. Thus the inference is plain that nature permits only a just and moderate use of its powers, the penalty for the infringement being loss of strength and exhaustion. These cautions are especially necessary to all who intend practicing ventriloquism. He who possesses a voice of this orotund character can better encounter the additional strain on the vocal organs necessitated by directing their functions to a new and strange exercise, which, however, will become more and more easy with moderate and regular practice. A ventriloquial voice, of whatever character it may be, requires a retention of the inspired air in the lungs, which calls for some additional support for the abdominal muscles, the diaphragm of the stomach, and the muscles of the chest. The cavity in the mouth is enlarged, as well as that in the glottis, and the passage of the air checked by the retraction of the tongue, which muffles the sound of the vocal cords, and causes the voice to sound as from a distance. Thus new conformations are made in the mouth by the varying positions of the tongue, and by drawing the lips down on one side or the other, which materially changes the sounds of the voice, for through being so muffled, they are originated from a greater depth in the larynx and ventricles, and thereby acquire those characteristics which are called ventriloquial. Now, it has been ascertained by repeated ocular examinations with the laryngoscope previously mentioned, and only recently discovered, that only the lower vocal cords serve directly for the generations of sound. That the vibration of these cords in the production of sound from the ventricles is an established fact, from the evidence of personal consciousness of the tremor in the chest when they are in action, it is also confirmed from the following observations. Each of the parallel pairs of cords forms between the edges a slit running antero-posteriorly, called the glottis. The lower or true vocal cords approach in vocalization to close contact, while the upper cords scarcely move, and leave a wide elliptical opening between them. As the upper chords have their points of attachment posteriorly and higher, they form with the two lower chords two lateral cavities, the ventricles. The two pairs of chords are the free interior edges of the membrane lining the whole larynx and extending into it to the right and left. More or less stretched and presenting resistance to the air forcibly expelled from the lungs through the trachea, they are thus made to vibrate. The upper or false vocal cords do not cooperate with them to generate tone, but like all the remaining parts of the mouth and throat, belong to the resonance apparatus of the voice, to which also appertains the back part of the mouth, the pharynx, above the esophagus, that is, the throat or gullet. This is separated from the anterior cavity of the mouth by the soft palate, the form and place of which in the mouth everyone knows. When a normal voice utters its lowest tones upon the vowel A, this being the vowel sound most favorable for observation, the following may be observed in the mirror. The arytenoid cartilages with great rapidity raise their points, the cartilages of Santorini, in their mucous membranous covering, and close firmly together. In like manner the vocal cords approach each other until their edges touch through their entire length. The upper or false vocal cords likewise approach each other, leaving, however, a space between them. When the scale is slowly sung upward legato, step by step, the above described movement of the cartilages and the vocal cords is repeated with every new tone, partly separating and partly closing again. The vocal cords, in the production of the lowest tones of the voice, are moved through their whole length and breadth by large loose vibrations, which are communicated to the other parts of the interior of the larynx. With every higher tone the glottis is somewhat shortened, and the vocal cords are more and more stretched. The raising of the pitch is thus effected by the greater stretching and shortening to a certain point. To those who may not have given any attention to this study, it is almost inconceivable to realize the wonderful and unique organism of the human voice, and this seems none the less strange when it is considered that every one of us possesses it, with more or less its scope and powers, its fullness, melody, and reach. It is the careful training of this delicately formed organism which gives to speakers, singers, and ventriloquists all their several fine tones and modulations, in fact, all their characteristic effects. To the speakers and singers who so often complain of fatigue, the suggestion is very apposite, as each may have reason enough to corroborate: they have been straining after effect. Most ventriloquists have acknowledged that they have often experienced fatigue in the chest, which they have attributed to the slow respiration of the breath in exercitation, although probably it is due to persisting in a high-pitched voice, when a middle voice would serve well enough as a contrast to the ordinary one. For perfecting the vocal powers it is necessary, therefore, to allow the voice to habituate its tones to the orotund basis, or timbre, as it is called, and then it will be better adapted to the development of even more difficult and astonishing powers than it would otherwise be capable of, for none of these qualities can be attained by either occasional or constant forcing or straining, but by moderate and regular efforts success is certain. Temperament has a great influence on the tone of the voice. A hasty temper finds vent in high-pitched tones, which by degrees breaks the natural pitch of the voice into a falsetto, which becomes habitual. Such shrill voices are always painful to the ear, either in singing or speaking, especially with women and boys. The vixen always betrays her temperament the instant her mouth is opened, in the efforts she makes to speak loud and reach her top note. Were the shrew to know how she thus labors to increase the vibrations of her vocal cords, when 1/10 of the effort is sufficient for the natural low colloquial tone, she might direct her temper to a better and wiser purpose. The vocal organs of every man, woman and child act and react, contract and expand according to the rise and fall of the voice in the same way. And yet, although all have faces and voices similar, there are no two alike. The inner nature stamps its impress on both, which may often enough be observed unmistakably. Like the expression of the features, the tone of the voice is a reflection of the character, and men are judged favorably or unfavorably according to such impressions as these may make on others. A keen insight into these characteristics of human nature is of no little advantage to the ventriloquist, who has to seize upon and mimic the eccentricities of voice and manner. End of chapter 2.
Chapter 3 of MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusion. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio. InterfaceAudio.com. MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Chapter 3. On the effects of sound, how to estimate them for ventriloquial purposes. It is well known that sound radiates from any given center. As a pebble dropped into still water causes a wave ring to strike out from the place wherein it fell, so a sound made by striking any stationary body ramifies in wave lines of the air in every direction, as far as the atmosphere will permit. When the sound is steady and distinct, it is called tone. When it is irregular or confused, it is called noise. Thus, a key struck on a piano, or any other musical instrument, gives a tone or note. But if many be struck at once, indiscriminately, there are occasioned noise and discord. A bird, such as a canary, whistles distinctly, and therefore gives forth pleasing and tuneful notes, while the notes of a parrot, being given confusedly, grate harshly on the ear, and create a noisy and unpleasant impression. These wave lines are, however, circumscribed by intervening obstacles. In water, a piece of wood or a ship will beat back the rising waves, which will subside before them, to reunite at a lesser or greater distance, according to their strength on the other side, the space immediately behind the obstacles being unaffected, calm, or placid still water. On the other hand, the air, being more rarefied than water, carries the wave lines at a greater velocity, and for this reason they are more easily confined by obstacles, such as surrounding walls or buildings, and diverted by a slighter effort than the other. The space behind or beyond the obstacles intervening receives either no wave-line sound at all, or so modified as to leave the impression of being muffled, faint, or distant. The strength of a sound depends on the breadth of its vibrations, that is, on the waves of vibration of the air. The pitch of a tone depends on the number of the vibrations, that is, the higher the number, the higher the pitch, and the lower the number, the lower the pitch. Hence, tones of a high pitch necessitate greater force to maintain the great number of vibrations, while the lower tones, though equally as loud, have fewer vibrations, and consequently call for lesser force or effort. The F sharp is the natural point of transition in all voices. From the chest voice to the falsetto was known to the old Italian singing masters. For the A natural, by which instruments are usually tuned, and which was regarded by them as the highest chest tone, had 250 years ago 370 vibrations, the same number as our present F sharp. A second is used as the unit of time, and by number of variations is understood the number which the sounding body gives forth in a second of time. The tones used in music lie between 40 and 4,000 vibrations per second, in the extent of 7 octaves. The tone used which we can perceive lie between 16 and 38,000 vibrations to the second, within the compass of 11 octaves. The one-lined A natural, from which all instruments are tuned, has now usually 440 to 450 vibrations to the second in America and England. The French Academy, however, has recently established for the same note 435 vibrations, and this lower tuning has been universally introduced in Germany. The octave of a tone has in the same time exactly twice as many vibrations as the tone itself. The fifth above the first octave has 3 times as many, the second octave 4 times, the major third above the second octave 5 times, the fifth of the same octave 6 times, and the minor seventh of the same octave 7 times. The voice in speaking. Article on acoustics. It is therefore of considerable importance to acquire a just discrimination of the strength and pitch of sounds, for everything audible comes under the category of tone or noise, the latter of which is generally the most difficult to account for, especially as regards distance and direction. The ear, of all the senses, is no doubt the most susceptible of being deceived. We judge of the distance and direction that sounds have traveled by referring to our former experience, although this reference may be possibly an involuntary act of the mind. In a city where the streets are laid out with that irregularity for which our ancestors seem to have been so intent upon making themselves famous, how often has the ear been perplexed as to the direction of the church steeple, whence the sounds come of the pealing chimes. The tortuous streets and alleyways and the higher prominent buildings divert the sounds and shoot off the wave lines in opposite directions, while the hearer, being in some place intervening, where the wave lines have been forced in an angular or zigzag directions, is puzzled to account whether they come from the right or the left. The ear cannot be relied upon for a correct perception of the direction of the wave line of sounds. It even falsifies the oft-repeated assertion that seeing is believing, for the eye is often directed to other objects than the one to which the true cause of sound should have been referred. This misjudgment of the sense of hearing renders it a very uncertain guide, and thus leaves the mind open to all those illusions which can be created by the muffled and imitative articulations or sounds made by the studiously devised arts of the ventriloquist. The undulations of the air which convey sounds strike the drum or tympanum of the ear, a fine delicate membrane, which closes the aperture, and as this is affected by the number and volume of these undulations, we obtain the sense of the strength and pitch of sound. The number of vibrations which the ear experiences is said to be 24,000, and are all included in a range of 9 octaves, from the lowest bass note to the highest ascertained tick of an insect. These vibrations of the tympanum are communicated by the auric nerves to the brain, the seat of the mind, by which all outward impressions on the physical senses are reflected, estimated, and adjudged, pleasurable or the reverse. To comprehend the nice distinctions in sound, it is especially of the greatest importance to study its several manifestations and differences, and to none can this be of greater interest than the ventriloquial learner. To judge nicely the effects of distance and direction of audible impressions or sounds is as necessary as acquiring the facility of uttering vocal or ventriloquial effects. Now, if the hands be pressed firmly and closely over the ears, the pressure of the air internally creates a sense of confused humming. Any external sound will then have a different effect as regards strength and remoteness. The ears being closed, the vibrations of the air are shut off from directly acting on the drum of the ear. Now, if a few words be spoken with the ears thus stopped, the sound will be felt to reach the auric nerves internally by a tube at the back part of the mouth, which conveys the vibration to the cavity behind the drum of the ear. This is called the eustachian tube, and it enables the ventriloquist to judge whether his voice is so pitched or modified as to resemble one from a distance, for it will be noted that the same sound differs when the hands are removed. Replacing them again, the sound is obscured, which should be particularly noted, so that when the hands are again removed, the voice must be so disposed as to imitate to the open ears the sound which was heard when they were muffled. And in these investigations all manner of tones and noises should be tried, their phenomena accurately observed. Then the would-be ventriloquist will begin to understand his physical powers, and the range, modulations, and capabilities of the human voice. An able writer on the subject says, "Too much attention cannot be bestowed on the study of sound as it falls on the ear, and an endeavor to imitate it as it is heard, for the secret of the art is that as perspective is to the eye, so is ventriloquism to the ear. When we look at the painting of a landscape, some of the objects appear at a distance, but we know that it is only the skill of the artist which has made it appear as the eye has seen it in reality. In exactly the same manner, a ventriloquist acts upon and deceives the ear, by producing sounds as they are heard from any known distance." It must always be remembered that the object of the ventriloquist is to make sounds not as they are heard at their source, but as they are heard after the wave-line vibrations of the air have conveyed them from a distance more or less remote, or obscured by some apparent intervening obstacles. People speak in the ordinary way, i.e., from the forward part of the mouth and lips, without any perceptible conscious effort, the mind being intent upon the subject of the conversation rather than its mode. But when they sing, their attention is aroused to the pitch, tone, and time of the voice, and they know that the act needs an awakening up from the indifferent mood in which ordinary talk or speech is delivered. In ventriloquial efforts, for the very reason that they are exceptional utterances of sound, there is a still greater attention and energy called for than in the others, as there is the necessity for studiously observing and managing with greater care the effects of one's vocal powers or capabilities. The grand difficulty with the learner consists in not knowing their range and strength, which can only be obviated by practice and testing them according to the instructions herein given. End of Chapter 3. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio. InterfaceAudio.com. Chapter 4 of MacCabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio. InterfaceAudio.com. MacCabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Chapter 4. How to begin and practice ventriloquism with entertaining dialogues for rehearsal. As a preliminary exercise, let the learner place himself before a mirror. A standing position is preferable, and endeavor, while in the act of speaking, to maintain a fixity of countenance, a rigidity of the muscles and nerves of the face and lips, so that no visible movement may be noticed in them. As the tonic sounds are the basis of vocalization, let him begin by enunciating the vowels fully forward in the mouth, saying with distinctness and regularity each sound by itself: ah, a, e, I, o, and u. Next, close the mouth and rest the upper teeth on the inner part of the lower lip. Be certain that the expression is perfectly easy and natural. Then practice the vowel sounds without disturbing that expression. It will soon be discovered that several different tones can be produced on the same vowel. Begin by forcing the sound against the extreme front part of the roof of the mouth. Then force the sound against the back part of the roof of the mouth, the palate, still keeping the countenance easy and natural. Next, practice to stop or shut off the sound by the upper part of the windpipe. In order to ascertain the exact spot here indicated, perform the act of swallowing, and you will find a subdued cluck made in the throat at the precise spot where you can develop the power of speaking inwardly. Let the above be considered the first and most important lesson to be carefully and diligently practiced. Above all, be careful to avoid straining the throat. The power of contraction and expansion must be developed gradually. After having practiced the foregoing sufficiently to comprehend its importance, proceed to practice in the same manner, to utter the subtonic sounds, the consonants D, G, K, L, N, R, S, T, in conjunction with each word sound. Thus, da, de, di, do, do, ga, ga, gi, gai, go, gu, and so on with the rest. The consonants B, P, F, V, and M necessitate in articulation some degree of facial movement. To obviate this, they can be at times left alone, as in the sentence, "Mind what you are about," which, by emphasizing the tonic sounds of the vowel, can be expressed, "Mind what you are about." This mode is necessary when speaking with a full face to the hearer, but the better plan to adopt in order to utter more distinctly is to turn the face from them as in profile, and then, by drawing down on the lips on the right or left, speak, as it were, from one side of the face only, keeping an immobility of appearance on that side facing the audience. In exercising this profile mode, it may be necessary to have the monitorship of some witness to check any facial action. Now proceed to practice short sentences, with due regard to the preceding observation. Keep the mouth closed, with the upper row of teeth resting, unperceivedly, lightly, and firmly on the lower lip. Keep steadily in view the injunction to force the sound first against the roof of the mouth and back part of the palate. When practicing to shut off the sound by closing the upper part of the windpipe, extend the stomach at each abrupt ejaculation, and it will be found to give forth increased power and volume to the sound. The lungs should be always kept amply sustained with a reserve force of breathing power, and each syllable have its due yet economical apportionment of breath. It has been shown that by a voluntary power over the muscles of respiration, the breath in speech is dealt out to successive syllables in such small portions as may be requisite for the time and force of each. In thus guarding against waste, the necessity of frequent inspiration is obviated, and the ability of pausing freely in the course of expiration between syllables and words allows a subsequent abrupt opening of the voice whenever it is required for the purpose of speech. As a means of testing and improving the voice, Dr. Rush says, the act of coughing may be made by a series of short, abrupt efforts in expiration, or by one continued impulse, which yields up the whole of the breath. Now, this last named mode forms one of the means of acquiring the orotund voice. Let the compound function, consisting of an exploded vocality and subjoined aspiration, be changed into an entire vocal sound, and there will be produced, with continued cultivation, the sonorous quality called the orotund. When freed from abruptness, it is like the voice which accompanies gaping, a hollow, ringing sound, different from colloquial utterances. By practicing this artificial cough as distinguished from the natural cough, its clearness and smoothness will be thereby improved, and a good basis will be obtained for ventriloquial exercitation and in discovering vocal force. A few weeks' practice of the foregoing will enable you to select a tone of voice best suited to your powers. Having done this, practice on that tone and in that voice until your ear becomes well accustomed to its sound and character. And now there will be a difficulty to be met by those who are unacquainted with music, the question of the pitch of the voice. A good ear, however, and patient practice will overcome in a measure this difficulty. The pitch of the natural voice, that is, its rise and fall, will not correspond with the assumed voice, for one will be of a higher pitch than the other. In ventriloquizing, each voice must necessarily possess a pitch adapted to it, to maintain a regulated rise and fall corresponding to its tone. Hence the learner will do well to cultivate one assumed voice at a time, and not venture all at once into a medley of voices. The quality of the voice must be strictly maintained, so that all the tonic and subtonic sounds will correspond to it, to mark the differences between it and the natural voice, or any other voice afterwards assumed. It will be understood, therefore, that the pitch and quality of an assumed voice must be observed throughout. Impress well on the ear the exact tone and pitch, not only of the natural voice, but of the ventriloquial one also. When this is achieved, great progress has been made, and the road to success is fairly cleared to the learner. The transition from one voice to the other is then made with certainty, and with that distinction which will mark well the one from the other, so necessary in alternate conversational dialogues. The falsetto voice in ventriloquism is very different from the falsetto voice in singing. The singer produces it by compression of the larynx. The smaller the orifice through which the air is forced, the shriller the note. But the ventriloquist not only compresses the larynx, but directs the sound to that part of the roof of the mouth which communicates with the nose. It must be observed that where this voice in speaking is wanting, no amount of practice will acquire it. If any have this falsetto on the voice, it can be made of good use in amusing ventriloquial effects. But where it is not, it is useless, as has been experienced, in wasting time and breath in the effort to acquire it. The simple rule for this falsetto speaking voice is to practice it according to the preliminary instructions. Look in the glass, keep the face quite still, and then direct the sound into the nose. This will not only aid in acquiring certainty and celerity in its production, but it will give a peculiar tone to the voice which is very effective. Another effective voice is the guttural, whether used as ordinarily or ventriloquially. It expresses the most powerful disgust, contempt, and hatred. In exploding this voice abruptly, the speaker feels, from the vibration of the vocal cords, that they convey an intense feeling, that the effect must spread wide, and whilst the air is assailed with its percussion, that it must, as Dr. Rush says, break through the ear into the understanding and heart of an audience. The distant voices, whether above or below, on the other side of a closed door or outside the window, are all produced in the same way. There is, in fact, only one distant voice. The place from whence it seems to come must be suggested by acting, and the imagination of the hearers will do the rest. To illustrate this more fully, and show how the judgment of both the ear and the eye may be deluded, let us suppose that the learner is about to manifest his powers before a company, who, it must be remembered, are all predisposed to be entertained, which very fact renders their curiosity and eagerness auxiliary agents in the illusion, because they are going to witness something which, contrary to their previous experience, goes against the actual evidence of their senses. The performer takes his stand at one end of the room, the larger the better, the audience being at the other. He prefaces the subject in a natural, easy manner, which must be done with considerable confidence. He begins by determining the voice which he is going to imitate, and in that voice, without any attempt at disguise or ventriloquial effect, calls out, "Hello!" By prolonging the sound of the O, and holding it steady, the note or pitch is ascertained. Then close the mouth with the teeth as before described, and in the identical pitch and tone repeat with force the answering "Hello!" shutting off the sound at the back of the throat, and at the same time pressing, as it were, with the stomach the sound upward against the top of the windpipe at the spot where the cluck is made in the act of swallowing. If the pitch of this suppressed voice is exactly one octave higher than the open one, it will have the effect of the same voice at a long distance, or it may appear as from a room above or from the roof. Anyone having an ear keenly appreciative of the distinctions of sound and voices will be able, with very little effort, to imitate any peculiarity of voice and manner that may have been impressed forcibly upon their attention. Wherever there is an intense desire to mimic, there is certain to be some latent power which only requires developing. Such voices as may be with little difficulty so copied are invariably such as a learner can easily turn into ventriloquial illusions. A natural aptitude for mimicry and expressing the emotional feelings naturally, which is, in fact, the essence of histrionic art, are just the qualifications to cultivate in the furtherance of ventriloquial effect. This exquisite perception of character, feeling, and expression is admirably recorded by Madame Seeler. There is a little comedy which has been recently passed from the German to the English stage, the title of which is Come Here. A stage manager is represented as examining a young actress, whom he requires to express with these two words every variety of emotion, from the greatest joy to the deepest sorrow and despair. When I saw Madame Janauschek, I was quite moved, and made to share in the variety of emotions expressed. Simply by varying the vocal tones, the shadowings, intonations, and tempi of those tones, the artist was able to utter these two syllables so as to produce in the hearer one state of feeling after another, of the most different and opposite character, with a success not to be obtained by the most elaborate and vivid description. And this effect was secured simply by the modulation of the voice. This demonstrates that the ventriloquist has to acquire even something beyond the specialty of vocalizing inwardly. In all or any of his illustrations, he has to enter into the spirit of the occasion, and has even the double character to play of identifying himself with his hearers in their curiosity, acting as their inquirer or spokesman, and, on the other hand, responding without appearing to respond, acting without appearing to act. He who becomes perfect in all these may rank as a true artist. End of Chapter 4. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio. InterfaceAudio.com.
Chapter 5 of Maccabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. Maccabe's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Chapter 5. Polyphonism and Ventriloquism. To imitate sounds and voices, such as the braying of an ass, the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the barking of a dog, the humming of bees, the buzzing of wasps or flies, is called polyphonism. Most people can imitate some or all of these sounds or voices, or have done so in their school days, and they know that it was the natural result of an inherent aptitude for mimicry. The distinction between polyphonism and ventriloquism may be very trifling, but there is a difference, and that consists in this, that the ventriloquist not only imitates sounds, but makes them inwardly, so that the voice appears distant and not present, and the more remote the greater is the illusion. Besides which, polyphonism has little in common with vocalization, while on the other hand ventriloquism rests upon vocalization and its modifications. Thus, the use of the liquid consonants ll, as in the Welsh name Llangollen, will, by constant repetition, convey identically the same sounds as water boiling and hissing. And the use of the consonants sz alternately will in a similar manner produce the sound of something frying or stewing. An amusing experiment may be made of the effect by taking two empty plates, using one as a cover to the other, and pretending to cook a chop or steak. By modulating the hissing sounds of these consonants, the fancied meat may be apparently stewing or frying. If the top plate is raised a little, the sound will be suitably made louder by a well-timed guttural effort, resembled by gurgling. The raising and the lowering of the top plate, and the various modulations of these consonants, with the turning of the face in profile to the witnesses, will convey, especially to the young, a pleasing illusion, which might be heightened all the more if this amateur sort of cooking were to be performed with the plates upon a stove. These are, however, but simple matters to the learner, whose object should be toward perfection in lingual expressions, or conversation with the distant voice. The dialogues herein given are merely for preliminary rehearsals. It rests with the learner to make others, and to make them effective, both as a mimic and a ventriloquist. 1 month's daily practice will enable him to illustrate and bring out their salient points, the proper emphasis on a syllable or tone, and to astonish his uninitiated friends with the strange voice within him. Above all, let him not strain after effect, But bear in mind that moderation gains more than excess in enjoyment, and that by practice alone can he attain perfection. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio, InterfaceAudio.com. MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Chapter 6. The Man in the Chimney and the Man on the Roof. Speaker. Hello, is anybody here? Voice. Hello. Speaker. Where are you? Hello, I'm here up the chimney. What are you doing in the chimney? I'm putting a clean collar on. You've selected a strange place to put on a clean collar. Not at all, it's a very suitable place. Oh, no doubt it's suitable enough up there. Well, come down. All right, I'm coming down. Take care. I know, I've been here before. Are you here now? I'm here now. Up to this point, the learner will be careful to gradually increase the volume of the ventriloquial voice and decrease his own. At the last phrase, stoop down toward the mouth of the chimney and say, I'm here now, out of the corner of the mouth, explosively, at the same instant starting back as though surprised. Hello, why, you startled me. Did I? Yes, you did. Get up a little higher. I don't like you to be so near. A little higher? Yes, a little. Well, there, will that do? No, a little farther. And so on until you fix the tone of voice you find best suited to your powers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have here a rather comical fellow. You'll find he's got a peculiarity that makes his conversation very droll. He cannot give a straightforward answer to any question I ask him, and I have to fence him a good deal. I say, hello, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Are you? Yes. Will you answer them? Will I what? Will you answer my questions? I don't know, but just I'll try. What is your name? What'd you say? There now, why didn't you answer my question? What did you say? I said, what is your name? Oh, did you say that? Yes. Oh, I didn't know you said that. Well? Well, you haven't told me yet. Told you what? I want to know your name. My name? Yes, come now, answer my question. What is your name? Do you mean my Christian name? Oh, I don't care. Say this with your face to the audience. Throw your hands apart in an appropriate gesture. I don't care. Then no more do I. In this phrase there is the labial sound M, which will necessitate the turning of the face from the audience, unless the learner can pronounce the word name as naying without facial movement. Speaker. Well, never mind. I will call you Bill. Will that do? Well, that'll do. Now, Bill. Well? Can you do anything to amuse the audience? What'd you say? Don't say that. What shall I say? Repeat my words so that I know that you have heard the question. I say what you say. Yes. All right, go on. Now, can you do anything? Can I do anything? Yes, to amuse. To amuse? Yes, the audience. The what? The audience. What's that? Now, Bill, I think you are prevaricating. You think I'm what? I think you're prevaricating. No, I'm not. I'm sitting down. Well, as the lawyers say, I'll put the question in another form. Can you do anything that's amusing? Amusing? Yes. Why, of course I can. Well, what can you do? What can I do? Yes, what can you do that is amusing? Oh, I can eat and drink and swear and... Oh, no, you must not do that. We would not be amused at that. I would. Oh, I dare say you would. Can you sing a song? Can I sing a song? Yes, can you sing a song? Well, I don't know. You don't know? No, I do not. Well, go on and we'll try you. You'll not try me, if I know it. Why not? I was tried once and I didn't like it. Who tried you? Judge Smith. Name some well-known judge. But I didn't mean that. He did. What did he try you for? For making a speech. What? You make a speech? Yes, I did. What did you say? I said not guilty. Was that your speech? That's all I said. Well, that was a very short speech. He gave me 10 days for saying that. I think it will not be safe to go any further into the antecedents of this fellow. I'll get someone else to talk to. Turning to the chimney. Have you got anybody with you tonight? I got Jem here. Where's he? He's on the roof. Do you mean to say that he is up there? He's on the roof, I know that. Will you call him, or shall I? You'd better call him yourself. He wouldn't hear me. Very well. At this point of the dialogue, I have always managed to produce a good effect in the following simple manner. Look up to the ceiling and down at the spot where you are standing, as if measuring the distance you are about to throw your voice. Move a step or two, as if selecting the best point to speak from. Place your hand to the side of your mouth, as if to shout up to the man on the roof. Be careful to place the hand that will hide your lips from your audience, and at the very moment they fully expect you are going to shout up to Jem on the roof, speak out of the side of your mouth next to the chimney, saying, "Are you going to call him?" Say this quietly, with a full tone. At the same moment, quickly turn your face to the chimney, as though you were interrupted and started, saying, "What do you say?" Though this may read as a very simple matter, the effect will be found to be very good if it is done easily and naturally. Continue the dialogue thus. Voice, quietly. "Are you going to call him?" Speaker, going right to the chimney. "What?" Voice, loud and impatient. "Are you going to call him, I said?" Speaker. I was just going to call him then." "You'll have to call him louder. He'll not hear you." "Is he deaf?" "No, he's hard of hearing." "Oh, I'll make him hear me." Here, repeat the action of looking up and placing the hand to the mouth as if about to shout, and say as before, out of the corner of the mouth, next to the chimney. Voice. "He'll not hear you if you don't call him loud. I know, 'cause I called him the other night and he didn't hear." At the first words of this sentence, turn and look towards the chimney. Keep up the voice, gradually dropping the tone, and speaking indistinctly, as though Bill were talking to himself. Speaker. "You mustn't interrupt me. I was just going to call him when you began to—" "I was only telling you to call him loud." "Well, don't tell me. But listen, I'm going to call him now." "Loud?" "Yes. He won't hear you if you don't." "Be quiet." "Jem!" "He won't hear that." "Now will you keep silent?" "I was only telling you." "If you tell me again, I'll not tell you any more." "Mind you don't." "Well, he didn't hear that." "Never mind. I'll call him till he does hear." "All right, go on." Speaker, coming forward and raising the face as though about to speak to Jem. Voice, quietly. "I knew very well he wouldn't hear that." Look around as this is said, and then turn to the audience and say, "Well, now, he's had the last word. Perhaps he'll be quiet for the man on the roof." Remember that this voice is only effective on the vowel sounds. The consonants are only suggested. I have so arranged the dialogue that everything Jem is supposed to say is repeated by Bill in the chimney, or the ventriloquist himself. The effect of this arrangement is that the audience have not time to doubt as to the words, though they only hear the vowel sounds in the suppressed voice. If the ventriloquist finds that he cannot satisfactorily speak in the voice of Bill in the chimney immediately after Jem on the roof, he should turn his face to the chimney and ask Bill, saying, "What does he say?" and while his face is so turned, speak out of the side of the mouth explosively, in the voice of Bill, the sentence which Jem is supposed to have uttered. Dialogue between the ventriloquist, Jem on the roof, and Bill in the chimney. Speaker. "Jem." Jem. "Hello." Speaker. "Jem." Bill. "Oh, there he is. Don't you hear him?" Speaker, turning to the chimney. "No. Did you?" "Oh, yes, I heard him." "All right, then. He is there." "I knew he was there." "Be quiet. Now, once more. Jem." "Hello." "Where are you?" "Oh, I'm on the roof." Don't attempt to sound the F, only suggest it. "Where?" "On the roof, he says." Here the word "on" can be spoken before turning the face from the audience, and suit the action of turning to the chimney, so that you can say "roof" very distinctly. Bill. "He says on the roof. That's what he says." Speaker. I thought he said that." Bill. "I knew what he said before he spoke." Here the words "before" and "spoke" require the action of the lips, therefore turn towards the chimney just in time to say the words while the face is from the audience. Speaker. "Now, Bill, will you be quiet?" Bill. I was only telling you. Well, don't tell me, but be quiet. All right. Jim? I can't get down. What do you say? I can't get down. He can't get down. Be careful to say this quietly, for as Jem is supposed to be shouting from the roof, there would be no effect of contrast or of distance if Bill shouted also. The voice dying away in the distance. Speaker. Well, I suppose you can get up now. Bill. You want me to go? Speaker. Yes, but I want to know you are safe, so you must shout good night all the way. Bill. Shouting. Good night all the way. No, I don't mean that. You said that. Yes, but I mean I want you to shout good night and keep shouting until you are a long way off. Oh, I know. Well, get along. Good night. Good night, good night, good night. This is very effective climax, and in a parlor, among a small company, may be productive of the greatest astonishment. To me it is the easiest of all ventriloquial effects, and I have frequently walked from the window or door into the middle of a group, looking straight into their faces, while they heard the voice, apparently, dying away in the distance. Turn your face from the audience as though you had forgotten them, and act as though you were really in earnest in your parting words with Bill. Under these circumstances, all necessity for concealment of the movement of the lips is dispensed with, and the only thing to attend to is the character and the tone of Bill's voice. Before turning your face to the audience, be careful to graduate the assumed voice until you have it well under command, at the spot where the cluck is made in the act of swallowing. Practice to shut off the sound at this place. Make the voice explosively on the sounds ut-ite to represent good night. Extend the stomach at each good night of the distant voice. Gradually raise the pitch as you suppress or shut off the voice. All this requires no facial movement whatever, but good acting will very much heighten the effect. The English Railway Porter, from the repertoire of the Ventriloqual, Mimical, and Musical Entertainment. Begone dull care. Character in dress. The porter, mythical, mimical, polyphonic, or ventriloquial voices. Fat little man, fat old lady, jocular young man, asthmatical old man, intoxicated man, Yankee chaffer. He who desires to present this sketch for the amusement of an audience should begin by committing to the memory of his ear the various voices of the above characters. The following description of the voices which I use may be of service, but it will be better for the amateur to invent and arrange the voices for himself. Fat little man. Fat people never have deep or big voices. Use a little voice with a moderate pitch for this character. Fat old lady. Falsetto voice, rather high-pitched. Jocular young man. Hard, loud, thin voice, moderate pitch. I produce this voice explosively against the front of the palate, immediately above the upper row of the teeth. Asthmatical old man. Deep voice, produced at the side of the mouth in the cavity formed by the cheek. The prolonged cough will be explained later. Intoxicated man and Yankee chaffer. These are simply mimetic voices and may be left to the mimetic instincts of the performer. Song. Railway station. Tune. The King of the Cannibal Islands. Ever since the world began, there never was nor never can be found such a very useful man as an English railway porter. Fat little man. Hello, hold on. Porter. Hello, somebody's sure to come late. Now then, look sharp, this way. Fat little man. Am I in time? Porter. Just in time. Get in here. Fat little man. In here? Porter. Yes, look sharp. Porter, there's no room here. Plenty of room. Stop where you are. Now then, ma'am, where are you going? I've got 3 trunks, 4 bundles, an umbrella, a flat iron, a gridiron, and 2 children. Get in with the children. I'll see to the luggage. Will you see to my luggage? Yes, ma'am. Get in quick. I won't go with a get in quick. Jocular young man. Hello, porter. Porter, turning to another part of the train. Hello, now, where are you going, sir? Jocular young man. I say, porter, give us a match. Porter. A match, sir. This is not a smoking carriage. You mustn't smoke here. Jocular young man. Never mind, it's all right. Give us a match, old fellow. Porter, holding out his hand for gratuity. There's no smoking allowed, nor any tips to the railway servants. Pocketing the tip. Thank you, sir. Right. So ever since the world began, there never was nor never can be found such a very useful man as an English railway porter. And when the train is pulling up at a station on the line to stop, and the passengers want to know how far they've come and wonder where they are, the porter shouts the name of the station, but you only hear the termination. On that point you never get information from the railway porter. Spoken. We wait at the station till the train is coming on. Then as the cars go by, we kick up a row and shout at the doors and windows. Rings the bell and shouts a jumble of incomprehensible words. Puts down the bell and says, then they know where they are. Then we have to go and collect the tickets. Now that's a nice job. We can go through the cars like you can here. We have to wait till the train stops at the station. Then we go and open the doors and call for the tickets. An English railway train is nearly all doors, and at every door there's sure to be a fidgety passenger who wants us to stop while they talk to us and make complaints and blah, blah, blah. All tickets ready, please. All tickets. Fat little man. Here, porter, I was put here in a hurry. Well, sir? Well, there's too many people here. I have no room. No room, sir. You've got a seat. Yes, but I'm sitting on this lady's hoops. Well, never mind that. If the lady don't mind it, you can't hurt the hoops. No, but they're hurting me. Can't help that, sir. Tickets, please. Fat lady. Porter, is my luggage all right? Porter. What luggage have you got, ma'am? Fat lady. Well, I've got 3 trunks, 4 bundles, an umbrella, a flat iron, a gridiron, a piece of string, and 2 children. Your luggage will be in the van. And where's the van? The van's behind. I never see a van behind before, and I won't go any further without my luggage. Oh, I'll see that you'll get your luggage, ma'am. Will you promise that I get my luggage? Yes, ma'am, I promise you. Well, I have an action for breach of promise if I don't get my luggage. All right, ma'am. All right, ma'am. Tickets, please. Asthmatical old man, angrily. Here, porter, put your nose in here, will you? Well, what's the matter here? Well, there's 3 young men smoking, and I am choking. Well, I'll soon stop that. Here, I say, young man, you mustn't smoke here. There's no smoking allowed here. Jocular man. We wasn't smoking allowed. We was smoking quietly. Oh, that's only a joke. You mustn't smoke tobacco. Very well, then. We'll smoke the old gentleman. He's half on fire already. Porter, did you hear that? Yes, sir. Well, that's the way they've been chafing me all along. It's very unwrong of them. I'm so asthmatical the smoke irritates my bronchial tubes. It's a shame of them, but never mind, sir. I'll stop them. You what? I'll stop them, sir. You'll stop my bronchial tubes? No, sir. I'll stop their smoking, sir. I say, porter, could you stop his cough? I can't help my cough, sir. Of course not. You know he can't help his cough. Well, he never stops once he begins. I can't help it, sir. When my cough comes on. Young man. Oh, he's going to cough now. Porter. Well, he can't help it. Young man. There he goes. Porter. Leave him alone. Young man. Shake him up. Porter. No, leave him alone. Young man. Oh, he'll never stop now he's begun. The prolonged cough should be produced without using the vocal cords. Perhaps it'll be better understood if I say avoid using that part of the throat which lies at the place familiarly called the Adam's apple. The learner will invariably begin by straining this delicate part of the vocal organs, for with a fresh unused voice, this is the part which is most used, and this is the part which should be least used. For though this is the quickest and easiest way to produce false vocal effects, it is the quickest way to produce fatigue and hoarseness, and ultimately permanently injure the voice. The cough should be produced at the side of the mouth by drawing back the tongue and exploding the sound against the palate. Intoxicated gent. I say, porter. Porter. Yes, sir. I want to speak to you. What do you want? It's all right. Yes, but what do you want? I want to know how far we are from the next refreshment station. You don't want any more refreshment, I'm sure. Don't I? I think you've had enough.
What's that?
If you take any more drink, you'll have too much.
Well, too much is just enough for me.
We've gone past the next refreshment station.
Have we gone past it?
Yes, sir.
Let me out. I'll go back.
No, and no. Give me your ticket.
How far are we gone?
I should say you're about half gone, or a good deal more. Yankee.
Say, Porter.
Porter. Yes, sir. Yankee.
Can you tell me, is this train going on or standing still?
Porter. I don't know what you mean by such a question as that, sir.
Well, I guess you go so slow you don't know the difference.
That's only your Yankee chaff, sir. You'll not be long going now.
I'm in no hurry now, or I should get out and walk.
All right. Give me your ticket, please.
I guess I got a ticket and a half.
Who's this half ticket for?
For this young man here.
It won't do. Half a ticket won't do for him. He's not a child.
Well, I know he isn't now, but he was when we started. We've been so long coming, he's growed.
All right. Rings bell. Finale.
So ever since
that ventriloquism may be some time or other of some practical service to the possessor may be gathered from the following circumstance. When I was a boy of some 14 years of age, I remember especially that on one occasion in my father's house, after enjoying myself well, boylike, at an evening party given by him, I went to bed after the company had broken up, and could not for the life of me fall asleep. As I lay in bed tossing about, I became gradually convinced that something very unusual was going on below stairs, for I distinctly heard footsteps, now here, now there, until I got at last into such anxiety and fear that I could not remain motionless any longer. Getting out of bed, I felt an irresistible impulse to get nearer to the place where the thieves were, for such I afterwards found them to be. Having crawled down stealthily by myself, I put in force, in earnest, what I had been already practicing, and began a conversation, raising as much of a hullabaloo as I could of several voices.
Here they are! Bring a light! Bring a light! There they go! Shoot 'em! Shoot 'em!
The thieves were so taken aback at being so suddenly discovered that they immediately decamped, and as the row I made roused the house, I recollect well, as the lights appeared, seeing one slouching villain hurrying past a door partly encumbered with the end of a tablecloth, which was being dragged after him. After that affair, I practiced more diligently than ever, when alone, whether in the house or in the open field, or rambling among the country lanes. And well I might, for I had impulse sufficient. Another incident in my experience illustrates somewhat the astounding effect ventriloquial illusion has upon the unsophisticated, when it startles them in all its telling force by the circumstance that no knowledge or previous intimation of it had ever been gained. A few years ago, while traveling in Ireland, I had a predilection for pedestrianism. I walked from town to town, over the hills and through the valleys, during the whole of 1 year. On the occasion I speak of, I had approached to within a mile of the town of Listowel, in County Kerry, where at the time a fair was being held, and on the way I met a man riding on a donkey. After the usual greeting, he stopped and entered into a little gossiping conversation with me. The donkey stood mute and passive, as only donkeys can, while I rested one hand on his neck. Unpremeditatedly I began making his head, or rather his nose, wag from right to left. Suddenly a whim struck me, and I asked the man, who was a born wag, by the way, "How old is your ass?" "Rising 4 years," was the reply. At that instant, by an imperceptible action of my hand, which was resting on the donkey's neck, I moved his head towards me, and I uttered an ejaculation in the voice which is described by using the side of the mouth with the face in profile.
"He's a liar! I'm 19!"
Apparently thunderstruck, I jumped back in a well-feigned surprise, while the good man dropped off like a shot, with a "Mercy on us! That ass spakes!" The effect was ludicrous in the extreme, for the poor fellow had a comical look of astonishment better to be imagined than described. How he did quake when the ass spake! Effect, of course, is everything, especially with the ventriloquist. But even apart from any ventriloquial illustration, there are other curious vocal illusions which create no little amount of astonishment. There is one, perhaps not so generally known as it might be, for it is an agreeable piece of innocent foolery, and very entertaining in its way. Two persons assist, one of whom, standing upright before the company, with his hands behind him, acts as a dummy, or pantomimic orator, while the other, stooping behind him, inserts his hands through the dummy's arms, and commences energetic action with them in the laying down the law style. In a voice totally inappropriate to the pretended orator, who, by the way, must be mouthing, if not uttering, the real speaker gives a burlesque version of some well-known quotation, such as, for instance, that in Holmes' play of Douglas. "My name is Norval, on the Grampian Hills. My father feeds his flocks, a frugal swain," etc., etc. The effect is irresistibly droll, and sure to gratify the company, especially if there be plenty of young folks in it. If the actors in it be a little removed from the audience, the illusion is extraordinary, and partakes of a ventriloquial character, which, however, it is not, because the illusionists, for such they simply are merely acting their separate parts in the same place, and there is no speaking inwardly. This sort of dummy acting is of no uncommon occurrence in France, and is indeed more general in theatres than many would imagine. There are many instances where the real speaker or singer is behind the scene. I call to mind a remarkable instance of this kind of substitution wherein the illusion was perfect to the audience. It occurred at the Prince's Theatre in Manchester, a theatre that, according to many travellers, has some reasonable claims to be ranked as one of the prettiest in the world, the acoustic properties being excellent. It was the first season after the opening of the theatre, and Shakespeare's Tempest was presented on the stage with all those scenic effects and completeness of detail which have rendered Mr. Charles Calvert's name so well, and deservedly known in more recent Shakespearean revivals. The part of Caliban was being sustained on the occasion by Mr. Cathcart, the elder Cathcart, since deceased, who played the part with great brusquerie, and with a voice moderately deep and full, though somewhat rough and unmusical. When it came to the end of Act II, where the howling drunken monster has to sing, I was standing at the wings, and was at once struck with astonishment to hear the refrain, "Ban, ban, Caliban, has a new master, get a new man," sung by someone in a smooth, light baritone voice, while Mr. Cathcart went pantomiming and contortioning about as if he were singing the song. Being asked to go into the auditorium to witness the illusion, I went, and immediately was surprised at the effect. The singing was apparently being executed by the actor, with gratifying applause, while the real singer was there below the footlights in the orchestra, with his back turned to the audience. The absorbed attention of the audience was centered in the actor and his doings on the stage, which naturally caused the association in their minds of the song with the character. The following account relates to some events which M. Alexander, before referred to, was concerned in. As they are of more than ordinary interest, they have a place here, without vouching for their strict accuracy. He interested many savans, among whom Sir David Brewster was one of the critical observers. M. Alexander, the famous ventriloquist, had an extraordinary facility in counterfeiting all the expressions of countenance and bodily conditions common to humanity. When in London, his mimetic powers, which he was fond of exercising both in public and in private, made his company in high request among the upper circles. The Lord Mayor of the city, in particular, received the ventriloquist with great distinction, and invited him several times to dine at the Mansion House. But it unluckily happened that on every occasion when M. Alexander dined there he could not stay to spend the evening, having contracted engagements elsewhere. The Lord Mayor expressed much regret at this, and the ventriloquist himself was annoyed on the same account, being willing to do his best to entertain his guests, whom the Lord Mayor had invited each time to meet him. At last, on meeting M. Alexander one day, the Lord Mayor engaged him to dine at the Mansion House on a remote day. "I fix it purposely," said his lordship, "at so distant a period, because I wish to make sure this time of your remaining with us through the evening." Through fear of seeming purposefully to slight his lordship, M. Alexander did not dare to tell the mayor that on that very morning he had accepted an invitation from a nobleman of high rank to spend at his house the evening of the identical day so unfortunately pitched on by the civic dignitary. All that the ventriloquist said in reply was, I promise, my lord, to remain at the mansion house, till you yourself think it time for me to take my leave." "Ah, well," said the Lord Mayor, and went off, perfectly satisfied. At the appointed day, M. Alexander sat himself down at the magistrate's board. Never had the ventriloquist contorted himself with so much spirit and gaiety. He insisted on devoting bumpers to each and every lady present. The toasts went round, the old port flowed like water, and the artiste in particular seemed in danger of losing his reason under its potent influence. When others stopped, he stopped not, but continued filling and emptying incessantly. By and by his eyes began to stare, his visage became purple, his tongue grew confused, his whole body seemed to steam of wine, and finally he sank from his chair in a state of maudlin, helpless insensibility. Regretting the condition of his guest, the Lord Mayor got him quietly lifted and conveyed to his own carriage, giving orders for him to be taken home to his lodgings. As soon as M. Alexander was deposited there, he became a very different being. It was now 10 o'clock, but half an hour was left to him to prepare for his appointed visit to the Duke of Earl's soirée. The ventriloquist disrobed himself, taking first from his breast a quantity of sponge, which he had placed beneath his waistcoat, and into the pores of which he had, with a quick and dexterous hand, poured the greater portion of the wine which he had apparently swallowed. Having washed from his person all tokens of his simulated intoxication, and dressed himself anew, M. Alexander then betook himself to the mansion of the nobleman to whom he had engaged himself. On the following day the fashionable newspapers gave a detailed account of the grand party at his Grace the Duke of Earl's, and eulogized to the skies the entertaining performances of M. Alexander, who, they said, had surpassed himself on this occasion. Some days afterwards the Lord Mayor encountered M. Alexander. "How are you?" said his lordship. "Very well, my lord," was the reply. "Our newspapers are pretty pieces of veracity," said his lordship. "Have you seen the Courier of the other day? Why, it makes you out to have exhibited in great style last Thursday night at his Grace of Earl's." "It has but told the truth," said the mimic. "What? Impossible!" cried the mayor. "You do not remember, then, the state into which you unfortunately got at the mansion house?" And thereupon the worthy magistrate detailed to the ventriloquist the circumstances of his intoxication, and the care that had been taken with him, and the other points of the case. M. Alexander heard his lordship to the end, and then confessed the stratagem which he had played off, and the cause of it. "I had promised," said Alexander, "to be with his Grace at 10:30. I had also promised not to leave you till you yourself considered it fit time. I kept my word in both cases. You know the way." The civic functionary laughed heartily, and on the following evening Alexander made up for his trick by making the mansion house ring with laughter till daylight. Many anecdotes are told respecting M. Alexander's power of assuming the faces of other people. At Abbotsford, during a visit there, he actually sat to a sculptor 5 times in the character of a noted clergyman, whose real features the sculptor was well acquainted. When the sittings were closed and the bust modelled, the mimic cast off his wig and assumed dress, and appeared with his own natural countenance, to the terror almost of the sculptor, and to the great amusement of Sir Walter Scott, and others who had been in on the secret. Of this most celebrated ventriloquist it is related that on one occasion he was passing along the Strand, when a friend desired a specimen of his abilities. At this instant a load of hay was passing along the Temple Bar, when Alexander called attention to the suffocating cries of a man in the centre of the hay. A crowd gathered round, and stopped the astonished carter, and demanded why he was carrying a fellow creature in his hay. The complaints and cries of the smothered man now became painful, and there was every reason to believe that he was dying. The crowd, regardless of the stoppage to the traffic, instantly proceeded to unload the hay into the street. The smothered voice urged them to make haste, but the feelings of the people may be imagined when the cart was empty and nobody was found, while Alexander and his friend walked off laughing at the unexpected result of their trick. Concluding remarks. The art of breathing, speaking, and singing. It may surprise the reader to find the simple and natural act of breathing classed as an art, implying that to breathe requires a method and a knowledge of certain rules. To breathe is the first act of our existence, and requires no knowledge whatever, since it is an involuntary act of nature. But nature very often acts imperfectly, and the intelligent mind directs her instincts and improves her action. An imperfect method of breathing is the fruitful source of innumerable complaints, and in 90 cases out of 100 lays the first seeds of lung disease. Very few people properly fill their lungs at each inspiration. Remember that the nose is the proper channel through which to inspire, and the mouth to expire during the waking hours. The nose alone, both for inspiration and expiration during sleep. Only those who keep the mouth closed during sleep enjoy healthy and refreshing slumber. A lung bath once a day will be found very beneficial to the health. Stand in the open air and firmly close the mouth. Take a long, deep breath through the nostrils until the lungs are well filled. Then open the mouth and slowly empty this. Repeat this for 10 minutes. This I call a lung bath. To acquire a good voice for speaking is simply to know how to use your voice properly. To this end, a knowledge of the construction of the vocal organs will be of great service, but a perusal of the scientific books on this subject is very confusing to the unscientific reader. I will endeavor to explain how to produce the voice in terms so simple as to be easily comprehended by all. The vocal cords are situated in that part of the throat commonly called Adam's apple. The false method of all uninstructed beginners is to bring to bear upon these delicate cords a great and injurious strain. The complaint, called clergyman's sore throat, is the result of this improper method of speaking. Practice to speak distinctly without using these cords. Remember that the roof of the mouth is the sounding board from whence the voice should issue. The vocal cords will vibrate instinctively, but you must avoid all effort to use them. These remarks apply to the art of singing also, for singing is prolonged speaking, the sound being prolonged on the vowels only. Our readers will obtain a perfect knowledge of the construction of the organs of sound and speech by carefully perusing the following able and admirable treatise on the physical requirements of song, which we have been kindly permitted to reproduce from Lotus Leaves, by its gifted author, Charles Inslee Pardee, M.D. It is frequently said of eminent singers that their vocal organs are of exquisite construction. The remark is so often repeated that we are led to regard it as the expression of a general belief that vocalists are endowed with unusual physical attributes, neither inherited nor to be acquired by the masses of mankind. It cannot, in truth, be said that this impression is entirely without foundation, but if by the expression it is intended to convey the idea that the basis of vocalism is a larynx of peculiar anatomical form or of rare functional power, it may mislead us. Setting aside the singular mental and emotional bias which seems to be essential to the musical artists, and taking into consideration the physical requirements of song only, we have two factors which enter into its production. Namely, the vocal organs, for example, the mouth, larynx, and trachea, and the ear. The action of the vocal organs is easily explained. The wasted product of respiration, the breath, is forced through a chink in the larynx, and sound is created, while form and expression are given by the mouth. That words are formed by the mouth, without the aid of the larynx, is a fact easily proven, as everyone knows that he can distinctly express himself in a whisper. The larynx is essentially a double reed instrument, the vocal cords being analogous to the reed of a musical instrument. The vocal cords are thrown into vibration by the breath, and sound is produced, the pitch being determined by the rapidity or slowness of movement. This in turn is regulated by the tension of the cords, the sounds of the highest pitch requiring extreme tension, sounds of the lowest pitch extreme relaxation of these organs. The different positions of the cords are caused entirely by muscular action. While the parts are at rest, air passes in and out in the act of respiration, causing no sound. as then their relations are not favorable to its production. Thus the larynx is the organ of sound, but the larynx and the mouth are the organs of articulate speech. These organs are susceptible of the highest cultivation, and their functional perfection can only be obtained by training. It is gymnastic exercise of the muscles acting on the parts which is required, systematic practice of their functional qualities, subject to the will. That is all. Within the register of his natural voice, anyone can attain mechanical precision or vocal expression. Even the register may be increased by the simple expedient of exercise. What then is so essential to the physical requirements of song, that the few who possess it are regarded as phenomena? It is an ear of exquisite function, such as rarely exists. The ear is as important as is the operator to the transmission of a telegram. It is the conductor, the critic. Witness the person whose deafness is of such a high degree that he cannot hear the sound of his own voice, and listen to his harsh, unmodulated tones. Witness the deaf mute, mute only because he is deaf, with vocal organs that are probably anatomically perfect, but with no guide in that process of imitation which, in the general way, constitutes man's training from the imperfect articulation of the words papa and mama in babyhood to the highest form of vocal expression. Of our special senses, the ear is the organ of tune. Its function is to receive the succession of sounds, musical notes, the various peculiarities of articulate speech, and to measure the periods of silence. It is the register of the properties of waves of sound, the intensity, quality, and pitch, conveying to the brain an impression of the relative intensity of the sound created by the firing of a cannon and of a pistol, of the quality of the sound of a violoncello or of a violin, the pitch of the soprano and bass voices. If perfect in its functional property, it registers the whole. But if not, either through irregular development, or because its normal condition has been changed by disease, it may do so but partially, and the unfortunate possessor of such an ear, particularly unfortunate if he desires to sing correctly, ascertains that he is unable accurately to determine the pitch of certain sounds, and that his most careful attempts to reproduce them result in discords. Moreover, he may observe that he cannot appreciate the quality of sound. Physiologically considered, the human ear is not a homogeneous organ, but the different parts are for the appreciation of the different properties of sound, and the absence of one part, for instance that which registers the quality or the pitch, would cause the disappearance of its peculiar function. In view of this fact, it would be interesting to collate the several opinions of notably just and impartial critics in regard to various vocalists, to know if the tenor of criticism is in a singular groove, if it has the appearance of being a certain formula or of particular bias. The singer who is smarting under the infliction of partial and unjust criticism of a performance that he has perfected through years of careful training, under the guidance of an exquisite ear, may find courage in the reflection that in all probability his critic, honest though he be, has imperfect aural perceptions, and is laboring under the disadvantage of performing work requiring the indispensable direction of an ear of faultless physiological attributes, an ear that he does not possess, that the author of the criticism is not prompted by any improper motive, nor is he captious, but is functionally incapable of receiving correct impressions. A human ear of perfect functional attributes is something rare. That competent authority, von Troeltsch, says, "I shall make too small rather than too large an estimate when I assert that not more than 1 out of 3 persons of 20 to 40 years of age still possess good and normal hearing." Good and normal hearing, in the sense of this paragraph, means good enough for ordinary purposes. It does not refer to that exquisite sensibility to all the properties of sound which is indispensable to the accomplished singer. The author, however, touches the point. If his estimate is approximately correct, few of our race may aspire to the distinction of attaining preeminence in song. My friend, do you have a wish to become proficient in song? Do not concern yourself too much about your voice. In the practice of your life you have imitated articulate speech with entire success, and now reproduce it in creditable manner. Your vocal organs show their susceptibility to training and discipline, and doubtless within the register of your voice may be trained to song, provided you have the all-important guide. Have you that guide? Can you recognize the distinctive properties of sound? Do you appreciate the intensity, the quality, the pitch? Have you in perfection the 3,000 nerve fibers of the cochlear portion of the ear, each one of which vibrates synchronous to the sound of its own appropriate pitch? If so, you can succeed. Otherwise, it would be as reasonable to expect of a blind man the reproduction of color. End of Chapter 6. Recording by Lawrence Trask. InterfaceAudio.com.
Chapter 7 of MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions by Frederic MACCABE. Chapter 7. Concluding Remarks. The Art of Breathing, Speaking, and Singing. It may surprise the reader to find the simple and natural act of breathing classed as an art, implying that to breathe requires method and a knowledge of certain rules. To breathe is the first act of our existence, and requires no knowledge whatever, since it is an involuntary act of nature. But nature very often acts imperfectly, and the intelligent mind directs her instincts and improves her action. An imperfect method of breathing is the fruitful source of innumerable complaints, and in 90 cases out of 100 lays the first seeds of lung disease. Very few people properly fill their lungs at each inspiration. Remember that the nose is the proper channel through which to inspire, and the mouth to expire during the waking hours. The nose alone, both for inspiration and expiration, during sleep. Only those who keep the mouth closed during sleep enjoy healthy and refreshing slumber. A lung bath once a day will be found very beneficial to the health. Stand in the open air and firmly close the mouth. Take a long, deep breath through the nostrils until the lungs are well filled, then open the mouth and slowly empty them. Repeat this for 10 minutes. This I call a lung bath. To acquire a good voice for speaking is simply to know how to use your voice properly. To this end a knowledge of the construction of the vocal organs will be of great service, but a perusal of the scientific books on this subject is very confusing to the unscientific reader. I will endeavour to explain how to produce the voice in terms so simple as to be easily comprehended by all. The vocal cords are situated in that part of the throat commonly called Adam's apple. The false method of all uninstructed beginners is to bring to bear upon these delicate cords a great and injurious strain. The complaint called clergyman's sore throat is the result of this improper method of speaking. Practice to speak distinctly without using these cords. Remember that the roof of the mouth is the sounding board from whence the voice should issue. The vocal cords will vibrate instinctively, but you must avoid all effort to use them. These remarks apply to the art of singing also, for singing is prolonged speaking, the sound being prolonged on the vowels only. Our readers will obtain a perfect knowledge of the construction of the organs of sound and speech by carefully perusing the following able and admirable treatise on the physical requirements of song, which we have been kindly permitted to reproduce from Lotus Leaves by its gifted author, Charles Insley Pardee, M.D. It is frequently said of eminent singers that their vocal organs are of exquisite construction. The remark is so often repeated that we are led to regard it as the expression of a general belief that vocalists are endowed with unusual physical attributes, neither inherited nor to be acquired by the masses of mankind. It cannot, in truth, be said that this impression is entirely without foundation. But if by the expression it is intended to convey the idea that the basis of vocalism is a larynx of peculiar anatomical form or of rare functional power, it may mislead us. Setting aside the singular mental and emotional bias which seems to be essential to the musical artists, and taking into consideration the physical requirements of song only, we have two factors which enter into its production, namely, the vocal organs, i.e. the mouth, larynx and trachea, and the ear. The action of the vocal organs is easily explained. The wasted product of respiration, the breath, is forced through a chink in the larynx, and sound is created, while form and expression are given by the mouth. That words are formed by the mouth, without the aid of the larynx, is a fact easily proven, as every one knows that he can distinctly express himself in a whisper. The larynx is essentially a double reed instrument, the vocal cords being analogous to the reed of a musical instrument. The vocal cords are thrown into vibration by the breath and sound is produced, the pitch being determined by the rapidity or slowness of movement. This, in turn, is regulated by the tension of the cords, sounds of the highest pitch requiring extreme tension, sounds of the lowest pitch extreme relaxation of those organs. The different positions of the cords are caused entirely by muscular action. While the parts are at rest, air passes in and out in the act of respiration, causing no sound, as then their relations are not favourable to its production. Thus the larynx is the organ of sound, but the larynx and mouth are the organs of articulate speech. These organs are susceptible of the highest cultivation, and their functional perfection can only be attained by training. It is gymnastic exercise of the muscles, acting on the parts, which is required, systematic practice of their functional qualities, subject to the will. That is all. Within the register of his natural voice, any one can attain mechanical precision of vocal expression. Even the register may be increased by the simple expedient of exercise. What, then, is so essential to the physical requirements of song that the few who possess it are regarded as phenomena? It is an ear of exquisite function, such as rarely exists. The ear is as important as the operator to the transmission of a telegram. It is the conductor, the critic. Witness the person whose deafness is of such high degree that he cannot hear the sound of his own voice, and listen to his harsh, unmodulated tones. Witness the deaf mute, mute only because he is deaf, with vocal organs that are probably anatomically perfect, but with no guide in that process of imitation which is the general way, constitutes man's training, from the imperfect articulation of the words papa and mamma in babyhood, to the highest form of vocal expression. Of our special senses, the ear is the organ of tune. Its function is to receive the succession of sounds, musical notes, the various peculiarities of articulate speech, and to measure the periods of silence. It is the register of the properties of waves of sound, the intensity, quality, and pitch, conveying to the brain the impression of the relative intensity of the sound created by the firing of a cannon and of a pistol, of the quality of the sound of a violoncello or of a violin, the pitch of the soprano and bass voices. If perfect in its functional property, it registers the whole, but if not, either through irregular development or because its normal condition has been changed by disease, it may do so but partially, and the unfortunate possessor of such an ear, particularly unfortunate if he desires to sing correctly, ascertains that he is unable accurately to determine the pitch of certain sounds, and that his most careful attempts to reproduce them result in discords. Moreover, he may observe that he cannot appreciate the quality of sound. Physiologically considered, the human ear is not a homogeneous organ, but the different parts are for the appreciation of the different properties of sound, and the absence of one part, for instance that which registers the quality or the pitch, would cause the disappearance of its peculiar function. In view of this fact, it would be interesting to collate the several opinions of notably just and impartial critics in regard to various vocalists, to know if the tenor of criticism is in a singular groove, if it has the appearance of being of a certain formula or of particular bias. The singer who is smarting under the infliction of partial and unjust criticism of a performance that he has perfected through years of careful training under the guidance of an exquisite ear, may find courage in the reflection that, in all probability, his critic, honest though he be, has imperfect oral perceptions, and is labouring under the disadvantage of performing work requiring the indispensable direction of an ear of faultless physiological attributes, an ear that he does not possess. That the author of the criticism is not prompted by any improper motive, nor is he captious, but is functionally incapable of receiving correct impressions. A human ear of perfect functional attributes is something rare. That competent authority, Ventriloqual, says, "I shall make too small rather than too large an estimate, when I assert that not more than 1 out of 3 persons, of from 20 to 40 years of age, still possess good and normal hearing." Good and normal hearing, in the sense of this paragraph, means good enough for ordinary purposes. It does not refer to that exquisite sensibility to all the properties of sound which is indispensable to the accomplished singer. The author, however, touches the point. If his estimate is approximately correct, few of our race may aspire to the distinction of attaining pre-eminence in song. My friend, have you a wish to become proficient in song, do not concern yourself too much about your voice. In the practice of your life you have imitated articulate speech with entire success, and now reproduce it in a creditable manner. Your vocal organs show their susceptibility to training and discipline, and doubtless within the register of your voice may be trained to song, provided you have the all-important guide. Have you that guide? Can you recognize the distinctive properties of sound? Do you appreciate the intensity, the quality, the pitch? Have you in perfection the 3,000 nerve fibres of the cochlear portion of the ear, each one of which vibrates synchronous to the sound of its own appropriate pitch? If so, you can succeed. Otherwise, it would be as reasonable to expect of a blind man the reproduction of colour. End of section 7. End of MACCABE's Art of Ventriloquism and Vocal Illusions, by Frederic MACCABE.